Imagine being successful in business but watching your personal life fall apart. Nearly 6 figures in debt, relationships on the brink, and feeling like a shell of your old self.
We swore that we would never use the word divorce, and this was the day that we used it. Linda, within 18 months, we paid off the 100 grand of debt. We completely restored our marriage. I lost the 60 pounds and restored my health. Are you living a life worthy of imitation? If you were to die tomorrow, would you be proud of the legacy that you left?
Imagine being successful in business but watching your personal life fall apart. Nearly 6 figures in debt, relationships on the brink, and feeling like a shell of your old self. You're winning professionally but losing what matters most. That was the reality for today's guest, until he discovered what most high performers miss. You can't build a lasting empire on a broken foundation. I'm Linda Vo, and this is Inspired by Success. Today, we're breaking down why your personal foundation drives your business results, how to lead at work and at home without burning out, and the leadership mistakes that quietly hold even successful entrepreneurs back. Let's welcome leadership transformation expert and entrepreneur, Mitchell Osmond. Welcome to the show, Mitchell.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Lynn. I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you today.
Me too. Tell us about your journey, because you hit rock bottom, you got into debt, your marriage was on edge, you felt empty. What was that turning point that made you decide enough was enough?
Yeah, I love that question, and it's a great place to start. And so for me, there were two kind of turning points. The first one was a fight, and the second one was a funeral. Okay, so I want you to picture with me, I was in the living room sitting down with my wife. We were about 3 years into marriage, and it all hit the fan. We started fighting about money, and then it morphed into a fight about me not being present, and it kind of just went on to the next topic. But like I said, at this point, we've been married for 3 years, but it was a tough 3 years. We had struggled through most of it. But this fight was our rock bottom. You see, we fought all the time, but this one was different. And, for the first time in my life, I felt like, I don't think I'm going to be able to fix this. We swore that we would never use the word divorce, and this was the day that we used it. And I knew that deep down, if I didn't change, then this was all going to be over. To give you some context, Linda, I'd recently been let go of a senior leadership position. I mean, my career was everything. It was my calling and my identity, and I spiraled into depression. I was 60 pounds overweight, like you mentioned. We were 100 grand in debt. I was medicating with drugs and alcohol, and now I was getting dangerously close to divorce and losing any hope of, any shred of hope, for the rest of my life. I was checked out, stressed out, burned out, you name it. And the thing is I had seen success professionally, like in growing organizations and leadership and building teams. But why was it that I couldn't figure out my life personally? How was it that I was so powerful at work, but powerless when I came home? Maybe your listeners have been there. And to back it up even more, Linda, I'd come from a dysfunctional upbringing. I had a non-existent relationship with my father. Alcoholism, drugs, crime were littered throughout my family. And I was kind of caught in the middle of it all growing up. And so I knew where I came from, right? And I knew I wanted something different for my life and for my family, but I could feel myself getting pulled back into the trauma of my childhood. And I could feel myself repeating the same mistakes my family had made, and my father did, and his father did. And when I would yell at my wife, like I could hear my dad's voice in the line, and I hated it, but it's like I was stuck. And I knew I was called to more, to be a better man, but I didn't know how or what to do. And it felt like at times I was two different people trapped in the same body. I could lead board meetings all day, but when I came home, I didn't even know how to talk to my own wife. And so I was experiencing this sort of duality that was sort of it was tearing me apart. And so that was the first moment. And then no joke, like a week later, the second defining moment happened in my life. And I was invited to sing at a funeral. This is the funeral part of the story. This was a wealthy man, a philanthropist. There was a couple thousand people there, and I was invited to sing the closing song at his funeral. And the pastor at the time was wrapping up his talk to people. And he asked everyone in the room, after sharing all the stories that this man had, the money he'd given and the people that he'd helped, he said, "Are you living a life worthy of imitation? If you were to die tomorrow, would you be proud of the legacy that you left?" And as I began to strap on my guitar and try to sing the lyrics of the last song, I could barely choke out the words, because all I could think was, man, if this were my funeral and people were talking about me, nobody in this room would be saying, "He inspired me to have a better marriage." He inspired me to, get my finances in order. He inspired me to how to live a healthier life. Nobody would want my bank account. Nobody would want my body, and the only thing that maybe they would say at that point was, man, he struggled. And then it was over. And it was sad, right? And that's the thing, Linda, like at funerals, people tell stories, because that's all they have left, right? And so for me, my story up to that point was filled with, I mean, the first chapter was my childhood, and that was a sad story. The next chapter was my marriage, and that was a struggle, And so I was determined that that day when I left that funeral, I would begin rewriting new chapters to my story, not just for me, but for my family, for my children, and that I was determined that I would end this generational cycle in my life. And so because my father couldn't do it, his father couldn't do it. And that was sort of the idea. And so what I started to do, Linda, is I began to surround myself with men who my ceiling was their floor. These guys were living where I wanted to go. They taught me everything I needed to know. They showed me what was possible because they were living it. And they held me to that standard that I said I wanted, right? They celebrated me in my wins and they held me high in my losses. It was real accountability. It was raw, it was painful, but it was the best thing I could have done. And honestly, Linda, within 18 months, we paid off the 100 grand of debt. We completely restored our marriage. I lost the 60 pounds and restored my health. And I was clean of substances and distractions, and I was focused, And so really what happened then, we realized that, like you had alluded to in the intro, I realized that I had it all backwards. Like, what was the point in the wealth and the influence if I was going to be sitting around the Christmas tree alone this year, right? If my wife had her own flat rented out somewhere else with my kids, I was chasing success, but I realized that I had it all backwards. And so I began to make that change. And eventually, one of my mentors said to me, Mitch, if you really want to create a legacy, you need to start a podcast to start sharing, the things that you've done. Because up until this point, I began helping friends in my life, like friends who were struggling in their marriage or helping friends get out of debt or, lose the weight. And so I started the Dad Nation podcast. That was about a year and a half ago. And then within 6 months, it became a globally rated top 10% podcast. It was awesome. But then I would have listeners from all over the world messaging me being like, hey, could you help me? Could you coach me? Or is there anything you can do? So I started helping other men do the same thing that I did. And I love, Ed Millett says this all the time. He says, you are the most qualified to help the person you used to be. And that's why I started doing this because, flashing back to my transformation moment at the funeral, are you living a life worthy of imitation? For me, the answer to that question is, what does it look like for me to live that kind of life? Is to dedicate my life to helping not just me, but other men, break those generational cycles, show up as more powerful husbands and more present fathers, and just to be all that they can be. And so that's why I started doing what I'm doing, and that's what I'm here, and that's what I'm about.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful. I love Ed Milet too. He's definitely a great influence. I'm just noticing the things that you mentioned before. You said that, you had a dysfunctional upbringing as well. And I can relate to that because I had a very, very dysfunctional upbringing. And in my life, I don't know if other people know the story, but raised by a single mother, I got on drugs. I was an addict for over 10 years, was a teenage mum. Like, I had my first daughter at 17, yeah. And I had a life of crime. And then, I was dealing drugs, and eventually I got caught and I went to prison and I lost everything. And then that's when change started happening. And I also contribute that to the power of God. So I am a
Yes.
person. And so from me going from rock bottom to where I am now, there's an analogy about the elastic band being pulled. The more darkness you have, the more potential you can fling up. And that's the way I see it. I wasted 10 years of my life, but that was a learning. That was all developing my character. I used to be ashamed of it. I used to not tell anybody, but now I like to tell people, if I can hit rock bottom, go from there to where I am now as an entrepreneur, as a podcaster, and as a mother, then anyone can do it. So I didn't even finish school. So it's all about constant learning. But when you mentioned that, you're winning in business, the clients that you have are just successful in the business world, yet what happened to you when you didn't have that success at home? I think a lot of people who have that traumatic upbringing or the dysfunctional family, they often just distract from that emotion, and they work and they build, you know what I mean? Not dealing with the core issues there too. But I'm curious to know how you started, and take me to those steps that helped you transform into the man you are today, like drug free, out of debt in 18 months, because that's pretty impressive as well. Most people can't achieve that within years. So
Yeah.
how did you get, you mentioned mentors as well. How did you, I'm just curious to know the strategies, you signed up mentor, like you went to events, how did you find the mentors in order to get to where you were? Did you pay for coaches? How did it begin?
Such a good question. And I think a lot of people, they all have an idea of what they want life to look like, but don't necessarily always take the steps, to get there. There's a few things that I think are keys to this. If I were to say, the keys to success, if you will, however you define success, because it looks different for everybody. But number one is clarity. Okay. So what we need to do is get very, very clear. And what I did and what I do with my clients is we begin with the end in mind. Okay. So Stephen Covey, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, chapter 2 is called Begin with the End in Mind. Napoleon Hill talked about this all the time. One of the greatest thought leaders of our time. Begin with the end in mind. And so for me, that funeral moment was literally when I was let it flash forward into the end of my life. And I realized I don't like where I'm headed. Right. And so, for example, with my clients, one of the first things we do is we write our eulogy. Right. And I know it sounds morbid or but it's powerful. And this is the best way we can begin with the end in mind. So what we do is, it's a real simple exercise. I ask the question, if you were to die today, okay, number one, what would your spouse be saying about you in the eulogy that they wrote as they're standing over your coffin? I want you to write it in the words of them. Okay. So for my clients, mostly men, what would your wife say about you, about the man, husband, father you were? Now, we're going to write a 2.0 version of that eulogy. If you were 100%, the man or the spouse, the mom, whatever your position is in life, if you were 100% that person and you were living completely up to your calling and you fulfilled your potential, what would they say about you at that point? Right. And I want you to write out that eulogy, because what happens is it gives us clarity, because the person we are today and the person that we want to become, or the life that we know we could have, everything in that gap is where our attention and our frustration lies, right? The hopes and the dreams of what could be. And so really what we do is we begin with the end, right? Another thing we can do is, I love this question. And this is really just, at the end of the day, we're talking about, this is a psychological term called externalizing, where we take ourselves out of the present moment and we think about the future, right? And so if I were to say to you, Linda, one of my favorite questions is this. I want you to picture, for example, we bump into each other in the airport in Australia. Maybe I'm visiting Australia. I'm going in, you're leaving. And I say, hey, Linda, how you been? It's been 3 years since I was on your podcast. And you're like, Mitch, this has been the best 3 years of my life. The question is what would have to be true about the last 3 years to have made them the best 3 years of your life? And what you do then is you answer very, very clearly all the details, right, of all the core parts of your life, spiritually, relationally, emotionally, physically, whatever. And you begin to write a very clear picture, like the final scene in a movie as we're driving off into the sunset, right? Where are you living? What are you doing for work? What is your relationship with your spouse like? What's your relationship with your kids like? How happy are you with your fitness? How much money are you earning? What do you do in your free time? And you get very, very crystal clear on exactly what you want it to look like. And then, because the reason why we do 3 years is because 5 years is almost too far, especially 10 years is way too far. Practical, and it's hard to wrap our heads around. But 3 years, you can almost taste it a little bit. And so what we do then is we reverse engineer, though, that dream into strategies and daily action steps to become that man. Because if I say I want to be 10% body fat, well, I got to learn to put down the donuts and start going to the gym. If I say I want to be earning $250K a year, well, what am I doing today to get me on that trajectory, right? So the first thing is we begin with the end in mind, whether it's 3 years or down the road, whatever. The second thing is community, right? So I mentioned that I brought 5 guys in my life that surrounded me. Now, this was so impactful that I actually created a framework around this called the Iron 5. And all of my clients have their own Iron 5, 5 men who surround them and they all carry specific roles in their lives. But I was a little bit more grassroots when I started. But simply what I did, Linda, was I just reached out and I said, all the areas I needed help with, my marriage and my finances, my spirituality, and my fitness. And I literally just said, who has the best marriage of anyone that I know, right? Who's in the best shape of people in my circle? Who has the most money? Who's the closest to God or has the best spiritual life? And honestly, I just reached out to them. I said, hey, I'm on this journey and I'm really trying to be the best husband that I can be. You seem like you have an amazing marriage. Would you be willing to sit with me just maybe once a month, grab a beer, grab a coffee, whatever? Just love to learn from you. And I know you're listening to this and you're probably thinking, well, I can't do that, right? I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a pain in the neck for somebody. To which I would say, and I ask my clients this all the time, have you ever had anyone reach out to you and ask you for advice? And then the answer is always, well, yeah. How did that make you feel? And they're like, well, it was kind of nice. It was kind of flattering. I said, yeah, yeah. I said, well, did you probably go out of your way to make time to meet with this person? Well, yeah, of course, because I want to help them. So then I say, well, what makes you think that you're any different than those people, right? Because here's the thing. Anyone that's ahead of you is going to understand what it takes to get there. So they're going to want to support you, right? The only people that are going to criticize you are the people who are behind you. And you know what? They don't matter because they're not going to be where you're going. So who cares, right? Let's lay our pride aside and let's reach out and get the help that we need, because chances are very likely these people will be humbled and flattered and would love to rally around you and support you, right? So I said clarity, begin with the end in mind, community, and then the coaching, which is whether it's, when I say coaching, I mean like it could be a therapist, it could be a trainer, it could be a coach. But what these guys do is they collapse the amount of time it takes, right? It took me 8 years. Really, over the whole run of things to get to where I am today. I mean, all of this was 8 years ago. Now, you could do it that way and struggle and, all those things. Or like I said, you could hire a professional to teach you the steps and expedite this whole process. So that were 3 things that I think if you're listening today, these are 3 big moves. Get clarity, get into a community, bring on a coach, whatever that looks like. And those would be massive levers to pull in your journey. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Those things kept me in line, right? Because when I was discouraged and wanted to give up, the men surrounded me and they're like, no, you're better than this. They called me up, not just called me out. They held my arms up when I was tired, and the coach called things out in me and again called me up, right? And then that clarity came from the vision of the future, and it was all connected to my why, right? And that's why I say why power is so much stronger than your willpower, because your willpower is going to fade. But if what you're going after is connected deeply to your why, the man or the woman that I am becoming, the father that I need to be, the mother that I need to be, well, that's powerful. That's connected to your why, right? And that's that other piece of clarity.
Yeah, that why piece. Sometimes you have to dig deep. I think it was in Ed Milet's book as well, he talks about multiple layers of digging deep into finding out that why as well. So, speaking about foundation, you talk about breaking generational cycles. And, I know that when you said that you could hear your father yelling and screaming, I have that same problem too, because I don't want to be like my mother. And she had the anger issues. And sometimes I have that and I'm like, oh, I'm starting to behave like her. And it's, it, but you do it, So how did you break that generational cycle, and what patterns do leaders, entrepreneurs unconsciously repeat that hold them back?
What's the secret weapon behind every top CEO and entrepreneur? A game-changing executive assistant. Hermessi gives you access to elite EAs who supercharge your productivity. From payroll and admin to social media and customer support, they handle it all so you can focus on growth and big picture decisions. These aren't your average assistants. They're expertly trained, thoroughly screened, and equipped with the latest AI tools to work smarter and faster. Ready to delegate and dominate? Get 15% off your first 2 months with code INSPIRE15. Don't wait. Visit Hermessi, that's HERMESSI.webflow.io, and take back your time today.
That's so good. Because you know what? Let's talk about this, because I want to share something with you. I just want to pull it up here because I want to get it right. But there's a couple reasons, and it could be anger, it could be finances, it could be anything that you are sort of wrestling with. But realistically, we are a byproduct of our upbringing, right? We know that 80% of the way we see the world and the way we view ourselves is formed before we're 12 years old. which is significant. That's why we always have to look to the past to understand how we view the present, because it was already formed before we were even teenagers. So we have to understand where all this stuff came from, right? And so the anger, the attachment style, you name it, it all comes from somewhere. And so one of the things that I walk my clients through, because we self-sabotage, right? Because of lies that we're believing. I had a client, one of my clients the other day, we just started working together, and he had struggled with losing weight, and he had hired trainer after trainer after trainer, but he kept overeating. And we were talking, and I'm like, could you tell me a little bit more about your past? What was your dad's relationship with food? How did he, what was your relationship with food as a child? And there were a couple of things. When he would come home from work, or when he would come home from school as a child, and he had a hard day, his dad would say, I'm sorry you had a hard day. Here's a cookie. Make you feel better, right? Here's a treat. Take you out some ice cream. So what happens? We develop this emotional relationship with food. It's like, okay, well, since I can remember, if I'm sad, food makes me feel better, right?
Yeah,
so if I'm mad, food makes me feel better. And so now we grow up and we're grown individuals, 40, 50 years old. But when I come home from work, I'm sad. Food makes me feel better. And so we've not yet broken this emotional bond. So that was one, came from his upbringing. Number two, I said, tell me a little bit about your dad. Is he still alive? He said, yeah. I said, well, tell me a little bit. Is he overweight? Is he in great shape? What is it? And he said, well, no, he's like a diabetic. He's 80 pounds overweight. He's almost in a wheelchair. So we started digging into that. I caught him in a sentence. He said, well, I'm just going to be like my dad anyways. I said, whoa, what are you talking about? He said, well, that's just the way we all kind of, my brothers, we're all on that trajectory. I'm like, why would you say that? Like over your life, right? So why would you speak that over your life?
Yeah.
But he just assumed, and this was a belief that was said to him as he was a child, you're going to become like your father. And so as a grown man, this guy has 3 successful companies, 7-figure entrepreneur, brilliant man, but is convinced that he's just going to become his father. So he began to self-sabotage his present to become that man. And so because of these 2 factors, all the things that were formed before he was even 12, this is why now today he was struggling with control. We were able to break that emotional connection with his food. The dude's lost weight. He's getting shredded. It's amazing. But here's what we do. We dig down, okay? And I want to share a framework that I've created with your listeners, if you're okay with that.
Mhm.
And it's called the clear thinking process. So the word clear, it really stands for 5 steps in this process, CLEAR. Now, because we all have these beliefs that we believe about ourselves. They're lies. Maybe I'm just going to be like my mother, or I'm going to be like my father, or I'm just an angry man, or I'm just a whatever. And it's important for us to all understand that we have these mental strips. And there are 5 that I've noticed. Number 1 is I'm not smart enough to fill in the blank, right? Listeners, as you're listening to this, I want you to identify which ones you've struggled with, because I'll say personally, I've struggled with all 5. First one is I'm not smart enough to. The second one is it's too late to try something new. Like I've missed a moment or I missed my time. Number 3 is if I do blank, this is what's going to happen. And this is where you begin to fill in the blank and you begin to pretend like you know what's going to happen in the future, but you don't know what you don't know. So that's a fallacy. Number 4 is I don't have enough resources, money, or time, and it's this scarcity mindset. Tony Robbins says this all the time. Our biggest challenge is not our lack of resources. It's our lack of resourcefulness, right? And that's one of our challenges. The 5th script is if I do blank, people will judge me. And this is the most insidious script of all, because this is where we struggle with the fear of failure. But here's the thing, Linda. By believing this, we are giving the power to everyone else, because we let them decide if we're going to have the courage to do something or not, because we're obsessed with what they're going to think, right? And so as long as we do that, we let other people control and dictate our lives, and we end up really tampering what we can do because we're afraid, right? So these are the 5 scripts. Now, the framework, the 5 steps, all right, like I said, clear, CLEAR. Okay, so the first one, C, is call out the lie. And this is where you are going to go into the past and you are going to identify what that lie is that you're believing. It might be, like I said, this is the story I'm telling myself about blank is, right? This could be I'm just an angry man, or I'm too far gone, or I've missed the moment, or I'm just going to become an alcoholic, or whatever. Call out the lie. What is it that we're believing? The second step, and before I jump on, because we need to identify this, because it's not a truth, it's a tape. And that tape keeps playing on repeat. So we need to push stop on that, right? The second step is L, which stands for locate the source. So now we're going to say, where did that lie come from, right? What are the people or the situations that have started or reinforced that story, right? And so this is important because you got to name where it came from, because when you name the source, you can break its power. Okay. Now the third step is my favorite, and it stands for E. That E stands for evaluate the cost. So this is where we ask ourselves, what has believing this lie cost me? What has living by this lie cost me? My peace, my confidence, my relationships, the respect of my spouse, whatever. This is where you might write the phrase, the results I'm getting from telling myself this story are fill in the blank, right? And it's important to feel the weight of it, not to shame you, but to get leverage to change it. The fourth step is A, which stands for affirm the truth. And this is where we flip the script, okay? This is where we write the new statement that is true about who you are, right? So here's where we ask the question, what could be as true, if not more true, than this lie I was telling myself? So in my situation, I was always told, you're not the smart one in the family, right? That's your sister. So I was always told that I was never going to amount to anything. I was told you're going to be just like your father, an alcoholic, right? And so for me, affirming the truth was, I am an intellectual. I am focused. I have much to offer this world and those I love. You hear the certainty language there, right? It's present tense. I am, not I hope to be an intellectual, or I hope to offer much to the world. It's not I am. So we affirm the truth. And the last step is R, which is to reinforce with action. And this is where it gets tactical, where we don't just say it. There's nothing wrong with affirmations, but we live it, right? So what's one action I can take today that can prove this new belief to myself, right? And so maybe it's, if I think that if I'm having a hard time with my intellect, thinking I don't have anything to offer, or I'm not smart, then my statement is, like I said, I'm an intellectual. Now, what does an intellectual person do? They read books, they study, they learn, they take in wisdom, all those different things, right? For me, a courageous step was to start a podcast, which was crazy, because I'm really going to find out if I have value to add, because the whole world is going to tell me, and that was the ultimate challenge. So like, okay, if you truly believe that you have something to offer and you want to step into this, what do these people typically do? They share their knowledge with the world. And this was a way that I really took a step to reinforce that belief, this new belief, with action, right? So that's the framework. And I promise you, you work yourself through that system for any limiting belief that you have. That's the deep work, right? This is where we extract these lies that we believe from our subconscious mind, and we consciously think about them, we rewrite them, and then replant them in our subconscious mind. And I love this quote from Carl Jung. He says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate, right? So what we're doing is we are no longer letting ourselves be run by our subconscious or unconscious beliefs, but we're taking these thoughts captive and we're taking control and we're rewriting our story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the power of speech and the things that we say to each other, it's just I think I've been more self-aware of my thoughts as well. And, I know that a lot of people, like at the gym, for example, I meet older ladies, oh, I'm getting too old, I'm getting too sore. And I say, no, don't say that. Those thoughts, just stop saying that, because whatever you bring out to the world, that's what your body is going to make you do. So it's like casting a spell, just don't say that. So whenever you feel a thought in your mind, I love that how you dug deep and where did that thought come from, because some people don't realize it's from their upbringing as well. So it's good that you're bringing an awareness to it, and once you are aware of it, to repurpose that thought and change it around. So for me now, I'm just always trying to be mindful of the things that I say and how I feel as well. But one thing that it's, I know that marriage is what you mentioned before too. So I'm curious, my relationship is great, but we had rough times for many years in our relationship too. And it takes a lot of communication and compromise. There's lots of things to make a marriage or a relationship work. So I'm curious to know about you, because your marriage went from near divorce to now thriving. So what's one communication skill that saved your marriage and that helped you now, especially become a better, did that also help you to become a better leader in business, or how did Yeah, what was that communication skill?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I had to learn was how to connect with my wife on an emotional level. Now, we can get into this, and I have a free gift that I'd love to give your listeners at the end of the show, so don't let me forget. But here's the thing. In the United States today, and these statistics should shock you. In the United States today, 7 out of every 10 divorces are initiated by the women. Okay? In situations where the wife has a post-secondary education or she's a high earner, that number jumps to 90% of divorces are initiated by women, which is wild, right? Now, of those reasons for initiating a divorce, 80% of the time, the main reason is because the wife feels disconnected emotionally from the husband. And I've seen this to be true in almost every single one of my clients. It's because these guys are high performers and they're fixing things all day. They're paid well for their skills, their ability to strategize, right? And so what happens is, and this is totally fair, they go to work or they build a business and they spend all day providing solutions, solving problems, right? And then they come home and all of a sudden they're supposed to turn that off and not provide solutions. And it's like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean? And so what happens is guys come home and their wife is upset or their kids are running around screaming. It's chaos. And the first reaction is like, whoa, 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 I had a hard day too. What? This is crazy. I don't need this, and then they match that energy, right? So, and then what do they start doing? Well, they start doing the thing that they're best at, which is providing solutions. And so they start shoving strategies down their wives' throats or their kids' throats. Like, let me tell you to fix it. Let me tell you to do this. You don't need to fix. I'm going to fix. And the wife says, I don't need you to fix it. I just want you to listen. But what are you talking about? And so we get into this tension. And then where the husband's like, well, I'm just trying to help. You want me to help, don't you? And then he feels disrespected because he's just trying to do his best. And the wife is like, well, that's not what I need. What she wants is to be connected with and for him to empathize with her, to validate her emotions, to really sit with her and be like, man, that sucks. I'd be upset too if I were you. How can I support you? Right?
Yeah.
Not offer strategies and solutions. And so this is the biggest challenge. And so for me, I had to learn how to connect with her. Number one, because what happens with me and these clients is they end up treating their families like employees, right? They lead their families like staff members because that's just what we do all day. And so how do you flip the switch and come home and put the CEO hat away and pick up the father hat, pick up the loving husband hat? And what does he do? How does he show up powerfully when he walks through the door? Because that's an entirely different role. And so one time my wife said to me, I'll never forget it. It was actually when we were in this rock bottom moment. She said, you go to work and you give everyone else the Mitchell buffet and you come home and you give me the scraps and I'm tired of it. Right. And I was like, I'll never forget that. And here was the thing. I had it backwards. They should have been getting my overflow. They should have been getting my best energy, but they were getting the last. They were getting the crumbs on the table. Right. And so, but that's the thing. I was coming home and I was empty. I didn't have capacity to connect with her on an emotional level. I didn't even understand how. And there's a large reason for this. There's actually a psychological term called normative male alexithymia, which is a bit of a mouthful. But really what that term means, and psychologists have labeled it this, because when men are pressed to talk about their feelings, they struggle to find the words to say. We actually don't have the vocabulary. And we've been grown up and raised in a culture that says men don't cry, men don't talk about their feelings. What are you talking about? Stuff it, right? And so even if we did feel comfortable, we literally clam up because we don't necessarily have that emotional intelligence like our partners do. And so for me, I had to connect with her on that level. And then for her, she had to understand some of my basic needs. And so if you allow me real quick, a man's basic needs, and if you're a woman and you're listening to the show today, a man's basic needs are these two things: to feel respected and to feel competent. There is nothing more. If you want to suck the soul out of your husband, disrespect him or make him feel incompetent, right? Now, if I think about the times I've been hurt the most in my marriage, 90% of the time, it was because I felt disrespected or incompetent. Now, a wife's three needs is to feel safe, to feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel safe, right? The moment we stop making our brides feel seen, heard, and safe, well, they start feeling like they start losing respect for us and they make us feel incompetent because we're not meeting her needs. And then so when we feel disrespected or incompetent, we stop feeling the need to make her feel seen, heard, and safe. And so this is what we call the crazy cycle, right? And if you're a man and you're listening, those are her needs, right? And so ask her when you go home, Hey, honey, what does it look like for me to make you feel seen? What does it look like for me to make you feel heard in your own home? What does it look like for me to make you feel safe? Not just physically, but relationally safe, financially safe, emotionally safe. How can I do that for you? And with the men, if you're a woman and you're listening, that's big. There is one of the most powerful things you can say to your husband is, I believe in you. I believe in you. I'm proud of you. You say that to your husband, man, he can go on that for 6 months. That is encouragement. And the word encouragement means to inspire courage. If you want to instill courage into your husband, do that, right? And so I do this all the time when I'm speaking with men. I'll get in a room of a couple hundred men, and I'll say, what would you rather hear from your wife? The words, I love you, or I respect you? 99% of the room are going to lift up their hand when I say the words, I respect you. And they're always like, man, that's what really connects with me. Yeah, she loves me. That's great. But to know that she truly respects me as like a man, as a leader, as a father, and that she believes in me, nothing beats that. And a lot of people don't realize that, right? So those are some things that really helped me and my wife get reconnected, understanding her deepest needs, both as a husband and a wife. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you have to compromise together as well and have that
100%.
same energy, because it's not the same if one person is putting in the effort and the other isn't as well. And when you mentioned that, a lot of men come home, I was listening to another episode, a podcast where there was a couple and they were just talking about the man working hard, coming home, and he was so tired. And the woman, she was at home all day and she's got a high drive, and she wanted to constantly make love, but it was like, I don't have the energy. And so you hear it as well. Like a lot of men just come home from work tired, they sit on the couch and they want to just have their own time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all about prioritizing what's important. If you can prioritize, some of, how you said the buffet as well. Well, this is similar. Just by prioritizing your partner's needs, your wife's needs, and just giving her some of that energy so that she doesn't have the scraps. So it's really powerful. I love that. Yeah, you explained that beautifully.
Ready to revolutionize your content game? Meet Modern IQ, the AI tool that creates SEO optimized, plagiarism-free blog posts with just one click. No more writer's block or endless hours of content creation. Generate high-quality articles that boost visibility, save time, and slash marketing costs. Whether you're a startup or an established business, this tool is your content team, marketing expert, and SEO guru in one. Click on the link in the description to claim your free article and join forward-thinking entrepreneurs who are working smarter, not harder. The future of effortless marketing is here. Are you ready to dive in?
Thank you. Yeah, and that's a matter of communication, that whole piece, and coming together and being like, okay, well, let's have this conversation, because you don't want to be spraying that kind of stuff on your partner, in the moment. These are conversations you want to have before they come home, or the week before, like, hey, usually when you come home from work, I'm kind of in the mood, right? So how can we make space for this to happen? Maybe it means I come home and then she gives him 20 minutes. He can have a coffee. He can run around the block, whatever he needs to do, or just have some decompression time, maybe 30 minutes, give him some space. Let him kind of get into that place and then do that, right? Or maybe it's, again, you like you said, you meet in the middle. But that's a societal norm too, because that'll screw with your husband's psyche, because we're already battling that narrative of like, well, I should want to have sex all the time because I'm a man, and that's what the men do in the movies. We should always want it and never ever want to say no, never ever be too tired.
Yeah.
And then when all of a sudden we don't, it's like there's something wrong with me. I'm broken, right? And that's not the case at all. In fact, it's more often than not that they are overworked and they're exhausted. And they don't even have the courage to say they're not in the mood because they feel like they're not a man. Because remember, going back to that normative male alexithymia, they're not even comfortable talking about how they feel in the first place. So when a wife says, well, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to do this? I'm a woman. Shouldn't you want it all the time? That's destructive, right? Because it's already pressing this, you understand what I'm saying? And so having this healthy sort of place of emotional safety where we can both feel comfortable to share what's on our minds and it's on our hearts. It's so critical. And that's what so many couples miss.
And like you said, that males don't like to talk as well. And I noticed that. How do we, for the females out there, how do they get their partner to open up more and share and be more emotionally connected, especially if they're a high performer, or they just don't like to share that emotional side of them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say give them space. Know that just because they're not saying something doesn't mean they're not feeling it. I would say, again, I work predominantly with men, and so men feel just as many feelings as women, if not more, but they just don't necessarily talk about it or know how to talk about it, and don't necessarily want to talk about it because we're driven by solutions, right? And so let me break this down. We're going to talk about the feminine essence and the masculine essence. Now, notice I'm not saying genders. I'm just saying male in its masculine essence, because we have females that are highly masculine as well, and males that are highly feminine. But the masculine it's all about, we're driven by doing, right? The feminine essence is all about being. And that's why men go to do. When they get stressed, when they get overwhelmed, when they feel the pressure, they've got to do stuff. They got to work out. They got to build something. They got to, whatever. They got to fix it, right? Women want to sit in it. They want to feel the emotion. They want to nurture, whatever. Like they want to connect with a person on an emotional level. This is how they process. They're in their being. Very, very different. Right. And so let's give it a real practical example. So when you go, do you guys have Super Bowl parties in Australia?
Oh, yeah, sometimes. I remember it. When for American company, I used to work for, they used to have Super Bowl parties.
Perfect. So when you go to a Super Bowl party, or that doesn't have to be a Super Bowl party, it could be any big social gathering, where do you typically see the men?
Green, I guess.
Exactly. Gathered around the screen, on the couch, maybe eating some snacks, yelling at the TV, right? They're drawn to the athletes. They're drawn to the sport because the masculine is driven by excellence, by a strong sense of mission, by accomplishments, victory, the battle. And these athletes are some of the best in the world. They're the best at what they do. They've got a strong mission and a strong purpose. And we're drawn to it like moths to a flame. That's why we start fantasy leagues. That's why we do all that stuff. Again, doing. Where do you see the women typically?
Talking amongst themselves. Yeah.
Usually maybe standing around the island in the kitchen, pouring up a glass of wine, connecting with each other, nurturing relationships. Hey, how are you and the kids? How was your summer? How you doing? How was your heart? Just like pouring into one another, checking in, nurturing. They're driven by intuition, by relationships, by emotions. And so that's where we see the women. And that's normal. That's a part of the feminine expression. So the first thing we have to understand, to go back to your question, is for a woman, how to connect with her husband is, number one, understand that you're fundamentally different. And you can never expect your husband to be comfortable talking about his emotions like you are. And the harder you press him, the more uncomfortable he's going to get. Right? And so this is a skill that needs to be developed, which is this gift that I'm going to give your listeners at the end. It's going to help with this. But for now, asking, hey, what can I do to help? Do you need to take some space? Do you need to get out, work on a project in the garage? You want to, whatever that looks like. But we often need to get into our hands. We need to do something. We need to get tactical, right? Or we need space to process. And so me and my wife, for example, have a 30-minute rule. If I'm starting to get frustrated and overwhelmed, we take 30 minutes. That's because we know the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that's responsible for empathy, for logic, for reasoning, all those different things. Blood flow actually stops at that part of the brain when you're getting dysregulated. So you actually lose the ability to be empathetic, and you lose the ability to rationalize and be logical. So we take a break. And then all of a sudden, when that blood flow starts back up and that prefrontal cortex comes back online, then we can have the conversation. But a lot of times, because women are so intuitive and they have the language about their emotions and how they're feeling, and they're comfortable, they press, right? Like, what are you feeling? Talk to me. Tell me why don't you ever talk to me? You're like a robot, blah, blah, blah. Like and I know these words because I heard it, right? And that's actually just more agitating to a man, right? So the step would be give him some space and say, hey, what do you need? How can I help you? You want to take some time, go out on the deck, call up a buddy, whatever the case might be. Or like I said, you think about that idea of like respect and competence. How can you encourage him? Because if you encourage him, he's going to feel more comfortable to talk, right? If he feels like he's supported, that he feels like his wife is championing him, he's going to feel safe to talk. But if he feels incompetent, or if he feels disrespected, like the worst way to approach your husband is to say, if he's not talking, you never talk to me. What's wrong with you? Right? Because that says you're incompetent. Right? Why don't you ever show up? All you ever do is work. Oh, that feels disrespectful because a man's calling, his identity is wrapped up in his work. in his ability to provide for his family, traditionally speaking. And so when you say all you care about is work, you don't care about us, all of a sudden the husband thinks, well, you don't respect or appreciate all the things that I'm doing. And then he doesn't feel safe to have that communication. But again, he's not going to say, I don't feel safe, because that language is kind of feminine. It's not really comfortable, right? And he's not comfortable talking about his emotions, but that's really what's going on. So we encourage, inspire, lay on that, like, hey, I know you had such a hard day. You're such a hard worker. Like, thank you so much for how you provide for us. It's amazing. Can we talk just for a few minutes about something that's just been on my mind? You're doing so good at this. I love how you clean up and how you take out the trash and how you wipe down the counters. And I love how you show up for our kids and blah, blah. Again, encourage. But I would love to talk about how sometimes you're not fully present when I'm talking to you. Sometimes you scroll on your phone, and I know you love me, but I don't necessarily feel like a priority when you're on the phone, when I'm trying to talk to you. And I know you're trying your best, but could we have a conversation about what that looks like? Could you put your phone down when we're talking? Because that would just make me feel loved and seen and heard, right? And so remember, you see what I'm saying? And that is going to be received so much better than the straight up criticism. Why don't you ever talk to me? You're always on your phone. You're always at work. That language is so critical, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. And a lot of women do that. I know that. With my other female friends, it's just a natural way that women talk. So some very great tips and advice there. You seem so knowledgeable in the relationship aspect. So I'm just curious, and business as well. So what are the books that have helped you? Or you've mentioned, learning, being intellectual. I love reading myself as well. And there's some books that have made huge impacts. So can you share some of the books that have helped you in your life, whether that be in marriage or in business or relate to like mindset? What are the top books that you recommend that have highly inspired you and changed you in a great way?
Yeah, I love that. So I'll give you a couple in each category, maybe. So when the context of mindset and our brains, Limitless by Jim Quick is a brilliant book. And this is a bit meta, but the whole book is based about how to learn, right? How to learn more effectively. So he goes through everything on like how to increase your memory, how to speed read, how to eliminate, the self-sabotage, or how to expand your vision for what's possible. You name it. It's a brilliant book that is really, really good for just unlocking the mind, for sure. The second one that I recently read is by one of my mentors, actually. His name's Graham Cochran, and it's called Rebel. It's just the word rebel. And it's basically how to change your beliefs to change your future, right? So those two are ones that recently just really kind of have been resonating with me. If you're listening, I'm just looking around my office here.
Mm.
One of the best marriage books that I read and one I recommend to a lot of people, is The Meaning of Marriage by Timothy Keller. And it's just, if you're thinking about marriage, if you are married, if you're having a hard time in your marriage, this book is just brilliant at helping you understand your partner. And so, for example, he talks about like how oftentimes when people want to get divorced, they say, well, he's not the man I married, or she's not the woman that I married. And he says, well, of course they're not.
Change.
It is inevitable. In fact, and then he breaks down the science, and he's like, your wife will change on a fundamental level multiple times. For example, the first time is when she gets married. The second time is when she has children. The third time is when she hits menopause. Those are just three significant moments where they change, like I said, on their hormonally shift, their mindset shifts. Those are just three major components, but there's so many other times that they change, whether it's through trauma or life events, death, you name it. So it's even something like that. I'm like, well, of course. But we don't think about that, right? So his whole premise is like, because your spouse changes, that's not a reason to get divorced. The question is how do you change with them? How to communicate through that change? And that's what creates a lasting marriage. So that's a really good one. And then, you know what? For men, if you're listening, Hard Times Create Strong Men is a brilliant book about the evolution of men and masculinity, and kind of how we got to where we are today, where we struggle with understanding how to show up in the world today. What does a masculine man look like in 2025? Not many people know how to answer that question. But at one point, masculinity was not questioned. It was very clear. And now you can't really say that word without risking getting canceled because of toxic masculinity, right? And so that book is brilliant for helping a man understand, how do I show up in the world today and in my relationships? So couple titles for you.
Awesome. I'll definitely look into that. Finally, this has been a great conversation. I know we're running out of time. Where can people find you if they want to follow you and connect with you?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. First of all, I'll share that gift with your listeners because, like I said, those divorce rates are pretty sobering. And we know that the vast majority of the reasons this happens is because, like I said, a woman feels disconnected from their partner emotionally. And so this is just called the connection code, all right, which is 50 questions to spark the fun and bring the fire back. Okay. Now, these questions cover everything from like your dreams, like activities, stuff for fun. It covers passion, intimacy, you name it. I go there with all the questions. And what I tell people is like, maybe you want to go out on a date night. It's fine. Or maybe you just want to put the kids down, pour up a glass of wine. The only rule is the only questions you can ask is from this list, right? And this is because, men, we need to be connected physically before we can connect emotionally, right? And so we try that with women. We try to get to the physical first, but women need to be engaged emotionally before they can be engaged physically. So we're actually wired completely opposite. And this is why we get into this tension. And so this guide is perfect for helping men connect with their wife on an emotional level. It's questions that are designed to help unravel her, and engage her in a conversation to make her feel connected to you. And I'm giving it to you on a silver platter, okay, if you're listening to this. And honestly, some wives will download it and they'll send it to their husbands. I've had women, no joke, email me and they've been like, listen, who was that man that took me on a date last night? Because he was asking me questions I never heard of, and it was amazing, and so it works. It's tried, it's tested and true. And all you need to do is go to my website, which is dadnationcode.com/code, and you can get it for free, or you can put it in the show notes, Linda, if you don't mind. But please take that as just a way to say thank you for listening to our conversation today. How to get in touch with me, you can just check out the website, dadnationcode.com. Or honestly, without sounding vain, if you just Google the Dad Nation or my name, Mitchell Osmond, you'll see my face plastered around. But I do three things, right? Content, courses, and coaching. So the content is the Dad Nation podcast. Like I said, we have over 33,000 monthly listeners. We've been helping men all around the world through that, totally free. Courses, I've got something called the High Performance Husband, which is everything I teach my one-to-one clients in an online platform, right? And then the coaching, of course, we have a community and one-to-one, you name it. But those are the 3 C's. That's what I do. So if you want to check that out, I'd be happy to connect with you, whatever that looks like.
Awesome. This has been so valuable. Guys, if you found this valuable just as much as I have, please do me a favor and hit that like, hit that subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're just listening on the podcast, hit that follow button and let me know what you think as well. Thank you so much for your time, Mitchell. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. So good to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.